My name is Anita Sharma and welcome to Inkpothub Media once again. The theme of International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. Individually, we all are responsible to choose our thoughts and actions all day and every day. We can choose to challenge and call out gender bias and equality. We can all choose to seek out and celebrate women's success and achievements. At Inkpot Hub, we are celebrating her research. We are bringing to you her journeys, her challenges, her struggles, and that she experienced while creating knowledge and testing the existing ones. Our today's guest is Dr. Neharika Vohra. Her research journey started in the early 1990s when she chose to challenge the norms and went to Canada to pursue her PhD at the University of Manitoba, Canada. She came back to India and joined the prestigious IIM Ahmedabad in OBHR area. In her 25 plus years of experience, she published more than 100 research papers. Her work has been cited more than 4,000 citations, and recently she is appointed as the Vice-Chancellor of Delhi's Skill and Entrepreneurship Development University. Please join hands and let's welcome Professor Neharika Vohra. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Uh, First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your new role. It's like a huge shift from your earlier experiences, and you were a professor, you are a researcher, and then now you this is a very huge role which you have taken up. I would like to ask you, like, how this particular shift has changed your life. Has it impacted a lot?
In many ways.
Uh-huh.
For one, I definitely get to learn a lot of things, including the fact that I don't know many things.
Mhm.
So, while I knew that I don't know many things, but when I take over this role, which is equivalent to doing a startup, um, but a startup with not the kind of freedom that one has, but with uh, but within the constraints of a government system, um, uh, it's it's a huge challenge,
Mhm.
but it's also very exciting because maybe in a startup you're always concerned about where will the money will come from. uh, One doesn't have that concern here, but one definitely has the concern of what do you do in this space which will really make a difference. And that's the only reason I made the shift.
Hmm.
I felt that it was time for me um to experience for myself some of the things that I have spoken about, and also to make a contribution to the whole skilling landscape in the country, which I think would be a very important stepping stone for us as we get into the industry 4.0.
Mhm. Okay, great. So how are you managing these teething troubles?
Well, I have done, I think I'm doing what I have learned all through my life. When the going gets tough, you put your feet on the ground and you keep working.
Right.
And as you keep trying and you keep working, doors open, answers happen, new questions start to emerge. So the only thing that I think my research has always taught me, or as my journey as an academic is, um, you simply have to try harder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do. I try harder, and I what I don't know, I'm very candid to say I don't know,
Mm.
but I'm willing to learn. And what I make mistakes about, I am also very open to saying this was a mistake that I made, and I'm willing to keep working um, to find the best solution. So
Great,
that's what I'm looking at.
great. So I move to my next question, which is related to your personal life journey so far. So you have close to 3 decades of research experience. You have published more than 100 articles, research articles. You have more than 4,000 citations as of now today. You have written 5 books. You are a reviewer, editor, and you are an accomplished teacher, professor as well. So I'm sure this journey must have been very difficult, which must have been full of successes and sorrows. I wish to know your journey starting from University of Manitoba, your research journey.
Sure. Well, it's a long or a short journey depending on how you see it. Um, I actually started my research journey a little before I went to University of Manitoba. So just after I completed my master's in psychology from the Utkal University, I had the opportunity to work with somebody who then became my advisor, who was a Indo Shastri fellow, and he had come for a research project, and I became his research assistant.
Mhm.
And for 3 or maybe 4 months, from 9 to 7 in the evening, 9 in the morning to 7 in the evening, I read papers that were published in psychology from 1972 onwards at that point of time.
Mhm.
So I would read a paper, and I had to, and there was a format that had been created to kind of mark details about that paper, because the project we were looking at was indigenization of psychology in India.
Uh-huh.
So I basically read 15 years worth of research in 3 months time, sitting in a small office in Utkal University, because I was a research associate who was marking this paper.
Mhm.
And as I read these papers, and I got deeper into understanding of what kind of research was happening in the country, I definitely was excited to say, oh, maybe this is my life, this is what I want to do. And that is how I ended up applying to University of Manitoba, and this scholar who was there, Professor John Adair, became my advisor.
Uh-huh.
So I continued to work on that research project for almost 4 years uh, when I started it. And we published 2 or 3 papers based on it. It shaped the way I looked at some of my research as myself, and it gave me a critical way of looking at work. So while I was doing my PhD, I continued on this project. And also, there was another project that came sort of out of this project, which was called we looked at at why the citations and the reference lists in psychology journals were just becoming really big, and they were almost unreadable. A paragraph of, first paragraph of a journal article in psychology has maybe 30 words and has 30 references. So it was annoying to read it. My advisor and I started working on it, and we ended up from what started off as a simple study as to see, why are there so many citations. It kind of grew to looking at citations in physics, citations
Okay.
in biology, citations in sociology, citations in psychology. So I spent a large amount of my time at the University of Manitoba sitting in libraries, counting references and citations in articles in various journals of subjects that I didn't know, but it was fascinating. And that is one of the papers that we finally wrote, which got published in the American Psychologist, which looked at this whole idea of, why, this whole explosion in citations in psychology. Um, and while I was also at University of Manitoba, while I was on these research projects, I decided not to make these my master's or or my research or my PhD research. So my master's and PhD research were on topics that were completely different.
Mhm.
So interestingly, my 5.5 years in University of Manitoba, so I worked on these 2 research projects. I worked on my master's dissertation, which was to say that, which was very interesting. I still think it was an interesting piece of research because we looked at, people possibly tend to ingratiate more in contexts that they are more familiar with. So in an unfamiliar context, you would possibly ingratiate less, and in a familiar context, you would ingratiate more, partly because how to ingratiate without seeming like you're ingratiating requires deep cultural knowledge, deep
Mhm.
understanding of the context. So
Mhm.
that was my PhD work, and it was fascinating. And
Mhm.
my PhD work was my master's work, and my PhD work was actually on um, something that again came out of my observation from the Indian immigrants whose homes I would visit while I was there as a student. And in many of them, my 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 research was again to look at why would these people who had pretty much all the creature comforts still not really satisfied. And so my whole quest was to look at life satisfaction, and didn't realize that what I was doing was very similar to something that was being spoken about in other disciplines at certain levels. That is, we actually know the world through a comparison. So the whole relativity concept, right? I'm happy relative to somebody else, or I'm dissatisfied relative to somebody else. So that was pretty much part of my PhD thesis. And while I was doing my master's at PhD in Canada, there was a rude shock that I got. There was something that I'd done as my master's thesis in India, my psychology master's thesis. And it was in the area of developmental psychology, and it was a very interesting piece of research. But I hadn't published it. So it was something that I had, worked with my advisor, we had worked on it, and I hadn't published it. And while I was studying my PhD, I realized that there was somebody who published exactly a very similar study in the Developmental Review, which is the top journal in psychology, in developmental psychology. And I was so upset
Oh my
because
God.
if
Okay.
I had published it, then it would have been our work rather
Your
than
work.
somebody else. That gave me this lesson that it's not only important to do good research, but it's really important to publish it.
Okay.
It's very important to write it up.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you came
And
back to India after that.
so I came back to India,
Uh,
and I decided. So for the first 3 years, actually, I had very little publication because I was, not only had I come back to India, I was setting up a home. I was teaching a subject that I knew almost nothing about. So I honestly didn't publish. I didn't know the context that I was in. I was learning the context. I didn't know what OB was. I was learning about OB. I was learning about the industry in India, and so on and so forth. And so the first 3 or 4 years, I didn't publish.
hmm.
But fortunately or unfortunately, I moved from IIM Bhubaneswar to IIM Ahmedabad at that time, and the change helped me also change gears and say, well, I must write and I must publish. And so I sat down and wrote my papers from my thesis. I ended up also completing, the reference study that I was talking about. I would go to conferences, psychology conferences, mostly psychology conferences in the beginning, and I would end up writing still keeping my discipline studies, like the meta studies, some conversation going in one or the other. And as I got deeper into OB, I realized there were many interesting questions that I wanted to look at, and so I started doing, slowly, some research on one topic or the other, and I ended up writing a review paper on OB in India, OB research in
Okay.
India, which got published in the Indian Psychological Abstracts and Reviews. Again, it came out of the fact that when I came back from Canada, I also came back with this whole aspect of being the associate editor of the IPAR, which was the
Okay.
Indian Psychological Abstracts and Reviews, which was published by ICSSR and SAGE at that point of time. So when I would read, because I was the associate editor, I was reading a huge amount of stuff. I realized that there was really no good review article of OB research in India, and that's how I wrote that paper. And as I wrote that paper, many ideas came to me as to what kind of research I'd like to do, and that's where my own research in OB started. I grew up in my research career with a very strong understanding of methodology and a very good understanding uh, of of
Okay.
analysis.
Okay.
And so that's always been my strong point. I in addition, I personally always felt that I wanted to do research on topics that were interesting to me, that seemed relevant at that point of time,
Can you
based on
throw some
the.
light on that? Like, because I've seen your papers in culture, diversity, and then women development, and then core OB areas as well. Um,
Yes, yes.
so, yeah.
So my research is definitely extremely varied.
Hmm.
It's not deep in one particular subject, um, which is very which was very interesting to me, because, as I said, I would look at a question that I was intrigued by, and I am a curious person. I like ideas, so my whole idea was to figure out an answer to the question that I was facing,
Hmm.
and or had been posed to me, or I was looking at, and that's what I have done. The upside of it is that you're never bored doing research. The downside is that you have to work really hard, because whichever topic you pick up, you have to read, deep, and you have
Absolutely.
to create a understanding, and then you have to write.
Hmm.
So in a way, I have wasted a lot of time reading a lot of stuff,
Hmm.
because I've always taken up a new question to look at. But on the other hand, I don't see it as a waste of time. I think every time I read something in depth, I'm enriched as a scholar,
Hmm.
as a teacher, as my practice that I work, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So um, so that's what I have done in terms of my research. So
Hmm.
there was a time that for example, the diversity piece that you talk about, uh, I think I was having a very interesting conversation with somebody from the industry, and they were talking about how diversity is so important. And this is about 10 years ago, when diversity was still very it was very
Nascent.
new.
Hmm.
And given my background in psychology, I said, so it's okay to have diversity, but what about including people, right? So having just diverse people is one part of the story, but what about the fact that I am very each human being is very uncomfortable with somebody who's different. How do you manage the culture there? And that's the whole conversation that got into, which said, like, okay, let's look at inclusion more than diversity. And
Hmm.
that's where my conversation with inclusion started. And for the last 8 or 10 years, I've been working very deeply in the inclusion space rather than the diversity space.
Okay.
And that's how that whole research started.
Okay.
And when I did ask that question, and I started looking at the research, I realized that there was very few scholars at that time who were really talking about inclusion. They were still talking about diversity. So it was interesting to start that whole space again.
Hmm. Hmm.
Also, some of my research has just come, some of my papers have just come from the fact that a student and I were doing a project, and when you did a project, you realized there was something that was worth looking at here, or worth publishing. There was a message that the world needed to take out, and that's what we've also done.
Hmm.
So yes, I've written and done research across areas.
Hmm.
um, Never a dull moment,
Hmm.
always something interesting to learn.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also a journey where I have found that, at least for me, it's been a fairly alone journey.
I can
Um,
imagine. Hmm.
yeah, it's pick your own bags, learn for yourself, um, write for yourself, do it for yourself. But
Hmm.
I think what has really been very, very useful for me is to have a group of very good PhD scholars.
Hmm.
And so we have co-explored, we have co-grown,
Hmm.
we have co-looked at various things. So that's been very exciting for me as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a very specific question. Which paper is very close to your heart and why?
It's a very difficult question, because every one of my papers I have something very special and a
Uh-huh.
soft spot for them. There's
Uh,
none of my papers. Yeah.
Carry on, ma'am.
Very difficult to answer the question, Anita. Really difficult. I can tell you some of the papers that I like.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. I can't tell you which one that
Okay.
I
Okay, tell me any two.
enjoy.
Okay, tell me any two then.
So, my paper, the American Psychologist paper is an interesting paper.
Uh,
Worked very hard on it.
uh,
But also it looked at a certain phenomena of in the entire discipline. And
hmm,
it went across disciplines to look
hmm.
at. So that was very interesting to look at. Um, my mm,
Okay, I
what
think it's
would
very
be?
difficult to choose from
Yes.
children life. So
Yes.
you can't have any favorite ones. So let me move to this special her research kind of scenario. I'm sure you might have experienced a lot of challenges considering Indian scenario, which is largely male centric and patriarchal. So coming from that experiences, what kind of message you would like to give to young women researchers?
Um,
If maybe you can substantiate from your examples if you would like
yes.
to.
Yes. So one of my experiences, as I said, is it's a lonely journey.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of times you will find yourself quite alone, especially when you go to conferences. um, you might be the only person going from your institute, you might be the only person representing your country, and so on and so forth. So it's quite lonely. Unfortunately, it that has changed, right? 25 years ago, when I went to conferences, I would hardly find an Indian, I would hardly find somebody Nobi, I would hardly find um, a woman participating in these conferences. Uh, so so it's important that we actually work on. Um, so my sense is that it's good to build networks. It's good to build people who you can work with, talk with, meet with. If you really don't want to get burnt out as you do your research. And it's good to also try not to doing everything by yourself. uh, Good to form teams where you can do, but make sure that you don't relegate yourself to a coordinating role only. You should be doing the real work in the research, because if you don't, then you will start feeling that you you will be marginalized in the entire research community. Also, my sense is, and this may not seem, this is not just for the women, I think no matter what, it's important to do research that is relevant, not just because it is publishable. I think relevant research is something that makes you feel happy at the end of doing it, and I think you are also contributing to answering some of the questions that are there. So um, I would say always do research that is relevant, and relevant at least to you, hmm?
Hmm.
And not just because there is a paper at the end of the tunnel.
Hmm.
That can't be the goal of research.
Okay. So I'm moving to the next part of our conversation because we have done a lot of serious discussions more towards research and all. I would like to do a rapid fire with you because
Oh,
we so that will bring some instant answers and instant reactions. Let me see how you take it. So let our conversation go a little lighter on, just to celebrate our womanhood. Okay, so let's go. First question: which is your must-have snack or drink while working on research?
water.
Okay. Any specific reason for that? You want to hydrate yourself all the time?
Yes, it's very important for me to drink water.
Okay. Okay.
I
Which
can
one?
forget sometimes how to drink.
Okay. Which one you are close to, gardening or baking?
Gardening,
Okay. Where does your peace lie, mountains or sea?
both.
Okay. What
I
would
am
you
a person of both.
Okay, great. What do you prefer, a sari or a kimono? I saw a photo of
Any
yours.
day, yes, but any day a sari.
Okay. Okay. If you have some amount of money to donate, which cause would you choose?
Education for the girl child.
Okay. What's your favorite quote that keeps you motivated?
Um, I don't have a favorite quote.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking your time out and giving this interview. And we interacted on a very, very large domain and scope. I really want to thank you on behalf of the entire Inkpothub and entire women fraternity. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for your wonderful questions, and all the best.
Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.